So firstly, before we begin the webinar, I just want to introduce Shadow to Shine because we have some Shadow to Shine mentees who are watching, but we also have people who aren't aware of the organization as well. So Shadow to Shine, we're an organization that works with young people to help them with employment and help them get into work and provide opportunities. So we do that through mentoring, we do it through work experience, and we do it through employability programs. We've worked with over 200 young people across London. We have patrons such as Alec Maxwell, who is the creative director of Vogue, Dre London, who is the manager of Post Malone, and we're about to announce a really exciting patron as well, but we'll wait until we do that properly. We were founded by Becky, who's on the panel, and she'll introduce more about herself when it gets to her. But for those who are watching who aren't one of our mentees and who are maybe thinking about entering the property industry or need support with getting into employment, then you can send us an email, or if you're someone who's already in the industry and just wanted some advice from people who are working in property and would consider mentoring yourself, then please do get in touch to become a mentor. So we've been running our industry insight series off the back of the pandemic because obviously we had to stop work experience in a lot of what we were doing. So we've been running these webinars monthly covering different industries, and property is probably one of the most popular industries that our young people are interested in. And in general, people seem to have an interest. So property itself is actually contributes over £100 billion to the UK economy each year. And the UK has the largest real estate market in Europe. Despite the pandemic and everything that's going on with Brexit, house prices are still continuing to rise, particularly in London. And the sector consists of so many different roles like design, commercial, residential, development. So we've tried to get a panel here that covers a few different sides of property so they can explain what they do, their journey, and how you can get there. So I'm going to start the panel with Becky. Hopefully Paul can join us later, but Becky is the director of Rockstone. Rockstone is one of Shadow to Shine's biggest contributors financially. She founded Shadow to Shine. So Becky, I'll head over to you, and if you could explain a bit about Rockstone first and then onto yourself, and we'll ask some questions as we go.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karina. That was a great intro. Makes me super proud. So Rockstone is something that I set up. It is a property company that specializes in the prime central London market. And I was at Foxtons from 2000 to 2011 and still to date undefeated as their top billing negotiator. So I banked £15 million on the course of 11 years as a sales negotiator. And that taught me how to centralize sales within central London. But when I was at Foxtons, what I realized as working at the Park Lane office was that my buyers would be looking for a lifestyle, not a property. They weren't looking at bricks and mortar. When you get into the super prime market, and the definition of super prime changes, it can be anything from 2 million up to 5 million up, but it led me to develop this company, which I wanted to change the narrative, on the lack of diversity in the property industry, the lack of women leading, whether it's an agency or being seen at the top level of director level. So in 2011, it's coming up to our 10-year anniversary in 3 days, which is amazing. And I'm so proud. We've banked to date £1.3 billion worth of property sales. That's just in the 10 years that we've been at Rockstone. And we've done some of the biggest, most landmark deals. We now have a lettings department. We have a property buying arm, a consultancy service. And we work, when I say prime central London, that's Mayfair, Marylebone, Knightsbridge, Belgravia, Primrose Hill. We're now actually branching out to certain parts of East London. We just broke a record for a house sale in Clerkenwell at £1,700 a foot, and in Knightsbridge at £4,700 a foot for a building with no services. So that's a brief analysis. We're an all-women team, very diverse. And Shadow to Shine is my love and keeps things moving. So 10% of the profit that the company makes goes to Shadow to Shine.
Thank you, Becky. And so you mentioned that you started at Foxtons, but what made you decide to get into property in the first place?
So I was previously in telesales, so I did retail. I mean, just to put this into perspective, guys, I left home at 15. I lived in probably some of the worst parts of London. I sold drugs. I was arrested. I mean, might have a very checkered past. But one thing I was very good at doing is hustling. And that's one thing that I realized was a talent. So I thought, well, hang on, I speak these languages. I look a bit different. I can work in, in many rooms. And I thought, let me take this hustling skill. So I did retail for my love of fashion, worked in Selfridges, then for Karen Millen, and then I fell into a telesales job. So I've been working since I was 14. I was doing charity work around the corner from my house, but actually Saturday jobs, after school, paper round, any way that I could make money. And so I come from an immigrant family. We're first generation immigrant into the UK. My mum had MS, so I had to fund everything. This isn't a time when schools or medicine was paid for. So I've always worked, and I fell into this telesales job, and I was a top biller at this telesales job. And I'm talking 400 phone calls a day to people that you're trying to sell things to. And then I tried to pitch for Foxtons. I wanted to be their head receptionist, and they refused me 3 times. And then I got this job at the telesales company, and I tried to call Peter Rollings, who was the MD at the time, who went on to head up Marsh and Parsons, and basically told him that he needed to take some advertising in my magazine. He said, I don't want you advertising, but I want you to come and work for us. And I went, that's great, because you've refused me 3 times. And I came back in and I was like, juices to the woman in HR. Anyway, I started at Foxtons Park Lane, and then the rest is history. But what made me get into it is realizing that coming from telesales is being in a job where people are calling you to spend money is the most unbelievable thing. And I just thought, well, I hustle. People want to spend millions with me. I've got the product. The rest is history.
Amazing. So for people who don't understand, you work in sales, but what does that actually involve? Like, what are the steps and processes in your day-to-day job if someone wanted to get into sales?
Great. So I think that the key message in here is, if with anything that you are involved in, whether it's selling cars, selling art, selling fashion, you have the ability to sell. If you're a salesperson, that's inherently in you. All the poor people in this call now and the webinar are inherently salespeople. That's what we do. So once you take that skill set, you have to have a really good product knowledge of what you're working with. And so my day consists of matching the person's requirements to my supply, and getting a bridge. But really the majority of my day is spent negotiating with clients, buyers and sellers. So all of these new websites that say, it's like when you go into Tesco's and you're paying for your food. You still want the interaction, and you probably buy an extra pack of mini eggs if the woman at the till was like, mini eggs are on offer. So, we are still a very important part of the sales process. And a lot of the time is managing people's expectations.
And in sales, so I know you because you have so many businesses, not just property. So it's probably quite hard to answer, but what is a typical day like?
Wow. Okay, so my day ends at 3 a.m. That's by the time I finish my emails. Really unhealthy. This is not something I'm putting out there is the reason for the secret of my success. It's stupidity. I mean, stupidity. Please don't take that on board. But in a perfect world, I'd be in bed by 10, but I tend to catch up on my emails very late. I don't sleep. I sleep 3 or 4 hours. I wake up, deal with my son, get him off to school, come back in, have a sales meeting with my team. And then it's just outgoing phone calls. Like if I'm in an office and I don't hear outgoing phone calls, it's probability. If you're not throwing enough at the wall, it's not going to stick. So it's just literally calling everybody and making sure that I'm matching, as I said, the buyer to the property and the instructions. So I would say I average on my screen time on my phone about 12 hours. It's quite a lot on the phone of a day, of a 24-hour day, which is not a good statement, but I would say 4 to 5 hours of that is talking.
Okay. And it's more than just someone wants a house and then they come to you and you sell it to them. There's so many other processes, right? Legals and HMRC. So what are the other factors that are involved?
The other factors is what's really prevalent in the property market now is what we call anti-money laundering, or KYC, which is in your industry, you need to be compliant. Compliance is key. So you need to understand when you're handling the levels of money that you're handling, the government is looking for transparency on where that source of wealth has come from. So getting into the property industry now, you have to be compliant. I would strongly recommend as well, if you want to get into property, which Olivia will go into, is be qualified, get regulated. We are an unregulated industry. Lettings is, but sales isn't. That will slowly change. So it's nothing better than to be ahead of the curve and your compliance and understanding the legislation. But yes, there's legalities, there's short leases, there's party wall agreements, there's working with developers like Gary that want to build big buildings and the residents kicking off, and things that come up in local searches. So it's not just opening the door and shutting the door. You have to be as understanding of the whole legal and compliance process as possible.
Okay, so what are some of the challenges that you're facing right now in the sector?
So in the sector at the moment, there's lack of supply. Central London and in every major city, if you choose to work in a major city, which I recommend, you're always going to have a lack of supply because the population will outweigh the supply. It's clients' expectations, it's the current COVID pandemic, but more importantly, it's the interest rates being so low. Yes, it's brilliant that the interest rates are so low, but it's not making people push to buy or to sell. And that is an issue. In a demand and supply, when you're selling property, you need there to be some pressure on the buyer or the seller. And at the moment, the way that the economically we're placed, it's not really pushing people to be that urgent. The lower level may eventually suffer, but with the stamp duty exemptions and stuff, that's keeping the market bubbling.
So how long do you think that's going to last?
I think we're going to see a little backlash when furlough kicks in and a lot of people lose their jobs and a lot of companies make more redundancies. I think you'll find that a lot of people can't keep up with their mortgage payments. But the one key thing you need to be mindful for is that interest rates. I mean, my parents sold, and Gary will probably know this, but my parents sold and they were dealing with 16, 17% interest rates. We're the lowest interest rate ever. But the problem is people are so heavily leveraged that if that interest rate starts hitting 3 to 4 to 5%, people may lose their homes. So I think we need to be very, very mindful of that being the point of change, the furlough and then the interest rate increments, and obviously another lockdown, which will affect things. Great.
Fingers crossed we don't have another lockdown.
No, I agree.
So do you enjoy your job? What's the most exciting part about property?
Wow, do I enjoy my job? I would say at the moment, this last year has been really tough, super, super tough. But the best thing about my job and the best thing about working in property, which I think everyone on this call will say, is that you're not stuck at a desk. I mean, with Paul, he's a surveyor, it's a difference. There's a lot of number crunching. With Gary, there's spreadsheets and, am I going to make money off this? But for me and Olivia being on the ground, we are meeting. Today, I've met, 8 different people from every corner of the world. And it's amazing. You go into people's homes. There's not a street really that I drive down now that I haven't sold a property on and I haven't been in. And it's amazing to be part of that. And also there are some magic moments where you actually make people happy. At the super prime level, it's hard. We're not selling the bread and butter, garden and we're moving and we're getting married. But that does happen. And those are the glimmers of hope. And it allows me to just not be stuck at a desk, which is the key thing for me.
Thank you. And today was an unusual day for you, right? You had an open house.
Yeah, we had an open house for a property in Lennox Gardens, and which is for us as a small boutique agency. It's no disrespect, the Knight Franks of the Savills Pool, the big honchos. We're a small agency. I fought tirelessly to get this listing on a sole agency. We had 20 agents turn up, and that's the difference with us. It's just a little bit more bespoke, and that's what I would say is when you want to get into property and you want to be an estate agent, discover the type of agent which matches your personality. So if it's a small boutique, Olivia will explain she came from corporate and wanted to come into small boutique. I came from corporate and wanted to go into small boutique. Identify the business that best suits your sales presence, but more importantly, a culture. A company culture is so important because you spend more time with the people that you're selling with than anything else. So if you're trying to get into an estate agency, look at the morals and the principles and the culture of the agency and your age. Do think about you rather than the company, because once you understand that, you're going to drive harder and fit in more, and it's going to work.
Thanks, Becky. And so you get so many people coming to you all the time who want to work for you. What are you looking for? And if we've got young people who want to get into sales, what skills do you need?
Well, I've developed a platform where you'll be able to showcase your profile, but I'll talk about that later. The skill set that you need, which is imperative, is sales is the transfer of enthusiasm. It's probably the best thing that anybody said to me. People are not buying your product, they're buying you before they buy the product. So if you don't have any energy in what you're selling, and knowledge, by the way, you need to know every single thing about property. So when I sell bricks and mortar, I know about the history, I know about which way it faces, I know the feng shui, I know the ceiling height, I know the architect that worked on it. You have to be passionate about what you're selling. If you're not passionate, how is anyone going to buy into what you're selling? So I would say is always be upbeat and knowledgeable.
Thank you. So we're going to come back to more questions at the end, Becky. So if anyone's got questions for Becky, please write them in the Q&A and we'll come back to them. I'm going to move on to Gary now. So Gary, could you please explain to people about City and Docklands? You're the CEO, so how did you start it? And explain to people your journey in property as well.
How long you got? So my journey is, I came from South Africa in 1987. Just to put in perspective, that was before Nelson Mandela was released. I was living in a country in an apartheid regime, which you either supported or you didn't. And I had the ability to leave. Luckily, I fortunately managed to go to university there. And the day after I wrote my last exam, I didn't wait for graduation, I left. I came to England. I didn't have papers. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I ended up opening up a small furniture shop in Kilburn, which I ran for about 7 years. And but I think, and it was small, maybe 1,500 square foot, like a secondhand furniture shop on a side road in Kilburn, and was ready to make ends meet. But what I did was I didn't hang around. I didn't wait for people to walk in. I started going to all the estate agents. What I noticed in England, there were pubs and estate agents. And I didn't know anything about alcohol other than drinking it. So I thought I'd call in the estate agents. And I started trying to sell them furniture for their lettings properties, which we kind of started getting successful. And then I kind of came across the fact that the Chinese, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysians were buying property in London, generally for investment. And I literally went to the Hong Kong High Commission in Dover Street, and I went through the equivalent of the yellow pages there, and I took all the names of the agencies. I flew off to Hong Kong. I stayed at the YMCA, and I went literally door to door calling on all the estate agents in Hong Kong. And the last one that I called on, I got an order. They had sold a building for St. George's in Victoria. And I got an order. I mean, I had a business maybe turning over £100,000 a year, and I got an order for about £250,000. And it was unbelievable. I remember going to my shop the next day. People listening to this probably too young to remember what a fax machine is. But I remember walking into my shop, and there was loads of fax paper on the floor. I thought, oh, shit, excuse the language. Oh, shit, my fax machine's gone wrong. But actually, it was orders from this guy in Hong Kong. And I got an order for £250,000. And anyway, that started a process. So what I started doing was going to Hong Kong, and I actually started tying up with the developers. So I'd actually go to the source of the development. And when people like Berkeley Homes, Galliard Homes, etc., were actually selling properties in Hong Kong, I was there offering furniture packs. And I built up quite a good business. I mean, we kind of let it tail off after I got into property. But at one stage, I think 1 year, probably the second or third year, we turned over nearly £10 million.
Wow.
So it was unbelievable. And then what happened was, because I was at all the exhibitions with all the different developers, and you could see each developer operated in a different way. You had like some which were very corporate, like Berkeley Homes. If someone made an offer on a property, the manager who was there wouldn't make a decision until he had spoken to his director, and the time changes. And then you had other developers which were more like, as Becky used the term, hustlers, would kind of, yeah, come on, let's do a deal. So you kind of watched how the market was going. And what I realized was that the developers used to take a flat and they would call it a loss leader. So they'd put like flats from £199,000, and there's only one of them. Okay. And I quietly went in, and my first flat, I bought one. I put down like £1,000 reservation fee, and hey ho, the next day I sold it on. Now it's a very different market today, as Becky will tell you, because now, I mean, in those days you could flip contracts, you could sell things, it was pretty easy. I then from there went and I bought a couple of flats from a developer. And the reason I bought them was I went to measure carpets for his show flats. And I did a deal actually in Lisson Grove. And I went to Singapore the next day, and I had a little office in Singapore, and my accountant who I'd met, she was a buyer of properties, said to me, you know, what's the market happening? I said, oh, I've just bought these flats, and I just flippantly added £20,000 to the price. Said, can I buy them? I said, well, you have to give me a bit of a profit. So I added another £10,000 on, and she bought the two flats. and was unbelievable. And I was in Singapore. She phoned me the next day and said, can we get hold of any more of these flats? And this was a development which probably had 6 months to go. It was due for an exhibition in Hong Kong in about 3 weeks' time. So I phoned up the developer. I said, how many more one beds you got? I don't know, there were 30 more one beds in the development. I agreed a price with him, called her, agreed another price, and I was in the property business. Again, as I say, it was a completely different world. It was much easier than technically to do.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I said, I was so lucky to have achieved that. But the truth is, it came, what I haven't told you was, for about 8 months, my first kid was born, so he's probably about 6 months old. And for 8 months, I went to Hong Kong and Singapore every single weekend. So I used to get on a plane on Thursday night, arrive there Friday evening, do an exhibition Saturday and Sunday. I'd then sometimes fly to go into China, mainland China, buy furniture in China, come back on Monday or Tuesday, and go back to Hong Kong on Friday.
You must have been.
So it was listen, it was great because we're having a great time and we're making money and felt very successful, but it was tough. I mean, after 8 months, I was finished. But the point that I'm saying that is because really for the people that are listening, it comes down to the harder you try, the luckier you get, in essence. Okay, and we fought, and then from there we kind of said, well, hold on, if we can sell, maybe we can buy some land, and then we started buying land, getting planning and building, and along the way, what we did was we set up another company called Life Residential, which is a management lettings company. Because what we noticed, you mentioned, Becky, the Savills and Paul, it's going to be a dig at Paul all evening, but the likes of Knight Frank and Savills and Jones Lang and Colliers, what happened was they'd do a sale and they'd forget about it. Okay, what I had to do to get a furniture order is when someone came in from Hong Kong or Singapore, I used to go to the airport, collect them, take them to my showroom, show them. So you built up relationships. Okay, and what I realized was they were leaving these people behind in terms of management, and they needed to have their properties managed. So I set up Life Residential, and we started. So what would happen is we'd go to Hong Kong or Singapore, Malaysia, we'd sell a property, we'd sell them a furniture pack, and we'd keep them for management. And we knew it was a service-based company. Today, Life Residential has 200 odd staff. We manage 5,000 properties over London. And again, all from a start of nothing to building it up. And we orientate ourselves around service. Moving from there, we started building. And then some guy said to me once, he financed a project for me in 2012 when there was no debt available because the markets had crashed. And he said to me, he said, Gary, I'm going to finance you. He said, we've checked your track record out. We know it's okay. He said, I don't know how clever or stupid you are, but even stupid people can make money in property, just don't sell it. And so what we've been trying to do over time is we've been trying to hold stock. So what our modus operandi is, we'll build a building, try and sell half and keep half, or a percentage of whatever we can afford to keep at the time. And so we've kind of, as City and Docklands now, we've transitioned into a vertically integrated company. So we go and we buy a piece of land, we get the planning, we then actually build and develop it. So we add value all the time. And that gives us the equity so that we're not too highly geared to be able to rent. But what we tend to do on the rental side is we try and give good value. Okay, so we just kind of add as much as possible that doesn't cost us, like a smile, for example. Okay, all the concierge in the building, if they don't smile, don't work for us, kind of thing. We want people to feel like they're coming home, etc. And that's basically, in a nutshell, what we've done. And today we are developing just in West London 1,250 apartments we're building currently at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's a very exciting job because, you know, I'm dealing with the customer, I'm dealing with the builders, the contractors, the suppliers, the finance, the surveyors. We have another guy, Paul, the valuers, which are difficult, very difficult at the moment. But it's been a very exciting challenge. And I think that I know I've been lucky. I've been extremely lucky. I've been in the right place at the right time. But I guess to a large degree, I've made my own luck. And it is possible because I literally started off with nothing. I started with absolutely nothing. And this year, the City and Docklands will turn over about £300 million.
It's incredible.
So, you know, and I still, as I said before, I still have to pinch myself because I still think, how did I do this?
No, it's an incredible story. And City and Docklands, so you're a developer, so it's different from Becky, which is sales. So for people who are watching who don't understand, could you explain exactly what development is? You said your company kind of keeps most of what you build, but is that different from other developers? Do most just build and then sell?
Yeah, so you get kind of two types of developers. You get the more corporate PLCs like the Barclay Homes, et cetera, which I tend to look at more as a factory. They have a factory, they get land in, they build buildings and they get them out the door and they make their profits on that basis. Then you get smaller individual developers that kind of don't do it as an ongoing business, but they do it as a specific development. And that can mean taking one house and refurbishing it or building 50 apartments. They all have challenges. I guess today the biggest challenge is getting the finance. Okay, and it's quite difficult to break through because you have to get a track record before you can get finance, and it's a little bit like a chicken and egg situation. But the key is to just kind of, once you get in, to just keep grafting and grafting and grafting. And at some point in time, something breaks, and the key is to grab the opportunity. Don't be scared of failure. And that's the real critical thing. If you're scared of failure, you know, I think I can't remember who had said that you know, the art of success is being able to go from one failure to the next without getting despondent. And you know, we failed. I mean, I'm very happy to say we've never lost money on a property, but we failed in our individual attempts to do certain things, and we just go back and redo them, and we learn every single day. Every single day I'm learning something new.
And right now we hear talks of like London is so full right now. So is it getting harder and harder to become a developer because you're running out of land? You have to go outside of London, or is there still possibilities to build here?
No, there's always going to be possibilities to build in London. I think the difficulty in London is that we have a really strange set of circumstances. Like Becky's saying about interest rate increases, I personally don't think we're going to see interest rate increases for a very long time. I also think that we're going to see huge inflation. You know, the world has had $10 trillion printed, okay? Just being printed into the system. So the beauty of property is when you own a property, and let's say you've got a mortgage, let's say the property is worth £200,000 and you've got a £150,000 mortgage, the mortgage stays the same, but the property goes up in value. Okay, and through inflation. So actually you're no better off, but you have more equity and more capital. So I personally don't think we're going to see interest rate increases. I think we're going to go into a situation like they've had in Japan, where you have low interest rates and a bit of stagflation. Stagflation means you don't see price increases. But because of COVID and so much money being printed into the system, okay, which is filtering in a circular economy, you're going to see prices increase, which is going to make it harder for people to get on the ladder, which means more and more people are going to have to rent. And the key is making sure as a responsible developer is that you remain socially inclined. Because what happens is if the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, that even if the whole economy lifts up, the divide gets greater and social mobility gets even harder. So like, well, what we've done for that, we've become a registered provider, okay? So all the affordable stock that we produce, which is like generally about 35% of all the developments, we actually keeping, but we actually running it in the exact same basis as our private stock. So we don't have separate doors, for example. It's all in the same buildings, etc. So that's kind of our contribution to the social impact of development. There is a shortage, as Becky said, you know, the population is growing, whereas land is finished. As someone once says, the factory's closed. God closed the factory for land. So what you're seeing in London, and I mean, typical is buildings are going higher. I mean, we're busy building a 55-story tower in Park Royal, of all places. Okay. It is a difficult industry to get in the way I got into it, but it's an exciting industry and you can make it. And you can make it. It's got endless possibilities. And as Becky says, there's so many different sections to it.
Mm-hmm. And you said it's a difficult industry to get into, but for young people who are thinking of getting into development, what are the skills that you're looking for when people are applying to City and Docklands?
look, at the end of the day, I want to see someone that I know is going to work hard, is going to put in the time, the effort. You know, that's what you look for. Education for me is a real critical thing if you can get it. And when I say education, it doesn't necessarily mean formal education. It means listening and learning. So really, we look for people like we look for sponges. We look for people that are going to absorb information and then listen and try and then kind of nurture them. Some people just aren't going to make it, and then some people will shine, as in your as the name of your charity, or you know, and you take the people that shine and you nurture them. So we're looking for people that are prepared to really graft and put the time in and the effort in. And I don't work the same hours as Becky, but it's you know, I've just got my life balance correct, and I've always said I've been successful because inherently I'm lazy. Okay, I don't want to work, so I work really hard so I don't have to work. So it's kind of a circular thing. But yeah, I think people just have to go in. You have to find which part you like. Whereas Becky, for example, says dealing with people. There's some people that like dealing with the more technical side, you know, the construction side. And the whole construction side is a vast industry. Do you know that the construction industry in England is England's biggest industry? Okay, so, you know, so just for example, what we've done is we also have a software business where we have a program called Visiline, which is a building scheduling business. And I mean, so you could argue whether that's construction or tech. So there's so many different things. And also the way we rent our buildings now is becoming much more tech orientated. Okay, so all our buildings have an in-house app, which people can go and book this and book that and do all this stuff. So it's a matter of staying with the time. So if you get into the industry, you don't just have to think of buildings and property. There's many, many aspects to it.
Thank you, Gary. So we've covered now sales, we've covered development, and within development, you've spoken about construction and tech. So for people watching, there are so many different avenues and ways that they can get into property if it is an industry of their choice. I'd like to move on now to Paul. You were mentioned a couple of times so far. So you're a surveyor and you work for Knight Frank. So do you want to explain to people your backstory, a bit about Knight Frank as well, and your role and what it means to be a surveyor?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, surveyor is a really broad term. I am an investment surveyor, so I get involved in the investment activity across different markets in the UK. I joined Knight Frank in 2014, so it's a long time, six and a bit years. And in that time, I've undertaken a number of different roles. Currently, I'm in the private team. The private office team, and I act on behalf of high net worth family offices, private property companies on the acquisition and disposal of commercial real estate across the UK. Knight Frank, which has been mentioned a couple of times, it's a property consultancy. In fact, one of the largest private property consultancy there is in the world. In that we are a partnership, so slightly different from our competitors who are listed. In that we have a more membership model, and so I'm even right now situated in the HQ in Baker Street, and of course I have regular contact with the key decision makers here as well.
Thank you. So what is your role as a surveyor? Yeah,
as I said, I'm an investment surveyor. So I appreciate the surveyor word is really broad. You have your building surveyors, you have your quantity surveyors. I'm neither of those. I strictly work on the investment side. So I advise clients on investment opportunities across the UK. And again, that spans from your hotels, your student property, your offices, your retail. So you probably find I don't actually mention houses because I don't cover houses. This is a completely different facet of property. One which many of us, we all interact with. And I think that's something I kind of want to lay out in this session. From the shops you go to, your dentist, your hospitals, that is commercial property. And you'd be surprised how much we interact with it on a daily basis.
Thanks, Paul. And have you always been in the commercial side?
That's right. So since the outset, I've been, very much involved in the commercial side. I mean, naturally, your first real interaction with property will be residential property. That's what you're born and raised in a home, and commercial somewhat secondary in that you probably don't even know if it exists, if the whole market exists. But yeah, I've very much been involved in commercial property from the outset, and was involved in a number of research reports, and that was my first real introduction into commercial property, in that I was an analyst here at Knight Frank. Got involved in publications across student property, hotels, PRS, all sorts, and that basically laid my foundations into where I am today.
And did you need a specific type of qualification to get into this?
Yeah, so Becky mentioned how some parts of the industries are regulated. So we have our governing body, which is the RSCS, and in order to become chartered, and that's something which all professionals in the commercial property space are, number one, encouraged to do so. Yeah, we get put through a 2-year structured program as a graduate, for example. And while it's changing slightly, one of the requirements is to have an accredited degree if you're going via the university route. Accredited degree, i.e. being a property related degree. So one of the things I did, I'm an economics undergrad. One of the things I did was I did a master's in international real estate and planning at UCL. And that basically put me to the pathway of then undertaking the graduate scheme, where I, upon completion, became chartered, which was a great thing actually. So you probably find, for some of you who might have seen it, across people's names, MR, ICS next to their names. That is basically the symbol to suggest that they're qualified and chartered.
Okay, and what's the typical day in the life like for you in work?
The last 12 months, largely at home, like everyone else. No, it's in the office. It's varied. I know it sounds cliche, it being varied, but it really is. 1 minute I could be analysing deals on a spreadsheet. Being on the phones as well quite often. The next minute I'm inspecting properties across London, and if you're fortunate enough, across different parts of the UK. So for example, last week I was looking at 2 properties, 2 properties, one in Mayfair, one in Farringdon, and probably will be seeing something else in the next few weeks as well. So yeah, it keeps it interested. I, for one, don't like staying in the office consistently for too long. So it helps that I'm mixing and matching.
What's your experience like working in a big company?
I think it's going to be that's a difficult question, because I've only worked in a big company. Mm-hmm. If I was working for a niche practice, then I'd probably give you a much better answer. So I must say I'm one of those, it's 19,000 staff, I think, across the world. I'm one of those big corporates, employees, which, it's a difficult question to answer actually. But one thing I would say is that there is that community as well. So I always describe my experience here at Knight Frank as being a big, small firm. And some of you may not agree with that, but it really is from the very top. You get a lot of face time with people, and there is that community sense, certainly here in Baker Street.
Amazing. So what are your favorite parts of the job? I
think it's the meeting people. You meet various different types of people, some more fun than others, but there's all sorts of different characters in the property industry. And not just your investors. I think one of the things I always try and do is to really build a relationship. And I hate the word networking, by the way, because networking feels pretty mechanical. It doesn't feel genuine. I always like to build a relationship. It's beyond just the networking. And I think what property, and certainly what my role allows me to do, is to build those deeper relationships.
And are you seeing any difficulties at the moment because of the pandemic or Brexit?
Yeah. Put simply, if you were overseas and, you know, previously before the pandemic, you were investing in UK property, it'll be really difficult to actually transact. And one of the things we're finding is that overseas investors, albeit love to invest, some of them don't have a UK representative which can, you know, make decisions on their behalf. So while there are some tech advances which is enabling people to do so virtually, I think certainly from my experience, yeah, it has created some challenges, but you know, they're challenges for a reason. We're there to try and solve them.
Great. So we have some people listening who are probably interested in going down the investment surveyor route, but they might not have the degree and educational background that you have. Is it possible for them to work up to do it through experience over a number of years?
That's right. So it's not just, and I just, you know, forgive me, I obviously just mentioned my route in, but there are, of course, various different routes in. So one being the apprenticeship route, which is a 5-year program. From my understanding, it's also, I think applications are all year round. So it's not a specific time of the year. I know, for example, that our internships, I think unfortunately, has just closed in terms of the applications for this summer. But again, typically we have graduate season recruitments, you know, later down this year. I think it's October, and also we have internships in February. So there are various different touch points in which you can apply.
Amazing. And have you got any specific skill sets that you look for or think that someone would need to get into your role?
I think, of course, the education, I mean, I come from the education side, so the education piece I think is important because, you know, we're dealing in a more competitive world. I think that's, I think it's a good thing, you know, being competitive means that, you know, you're pushing yourself to be the best, you know, person, you know, you can be. I've always said, now stripping it back, curiosity. One of the reasons why I know I love what I do and came into the industry is that I was always curious. What's going on in my local area? You know, suddenly there's now developments. This building has now been knocked down and now there's a new building that's going to be erected. So there's all of those, you know, things certainly made me more interested in property. And I think it's important to build that curiosity. And of course, I want people to feel like they can, you know, be confident enough to take the initiative and build relationships along the way.
Thank you. And before we go over to Olivia, do you have a career highlight so far?
Ooh, career highlights. I've met some important people, let's just say. And yeah, one thing I've certainly you know, enjoyed is that you end up learning from a number of experienced people and successful people as well. So yeah, I'll put it that way. I've met some important people.
Great. So if anyone has any questions for Paul or Becky or Gary, please write them in the Q&A box so we can get them at the end. And now I'm going to head over to Olivia, who is Head of Lettings and Associate Director of Rockstone. So Olivia, could you introduce yourself and explain a bit about your journey, please?
Sure. Thanks, Karina. So I started in property in 2011, a couple of months out of university. I had been working in fashion. I was working as a stylist assistant because that was always what I had intended on doing, and but wasn't being paid anything. So I needed a job, and the local estate agents in Chiswick, where I lived, had a job available, which I applied for and got the position as the assistant to the lettings manager in the office. Really, really small local company. So I joined there with the intention of just doing it for a couple of months to save some money and go off traveling, and ended up staying in it. And I'm still here in the lettings industry many years later. So I left there, went to Hamptons International in Kensington, and I was there for 4 years. After that, I was the top billing negotiator there for 2 years running in 2012 and 13. And then I left and set up the lettings department at Sotheby's International Realty. They were bought by another investor, the franchise. So they bought the name and then didn't have any of their data or back catalogue. So we were basically like a startup starting from scratch. So I did that for 2 years, and then was approached by Rockstone and joined Rockstone in 2017 to start the lettings department there. So Becky had been running Rockstone for several years at this time, but hadn't got a lettings department where they'd been referring business out. And she wanted to create a 360 model, so to be able to offer her clients a kind of an end point of all of the business. So that's what we've been working on for the past almost 4 years now. And it's been going strong. So we've got lettings and we've got property management, because the two are very closely linked. And since we started, we've done some pretty big deals of note.
Can you share some of those deals with us? What are some of the successes of Rockstone Lettings?
So one of the highlights was a property, it's called Mansion House, it's in Westminster. It used to be the Liberal Democrats headquarters, and it was bought by a developer, and Becky had it on the sales market. It wasn't listed for lettings, and I took someone in who I thought it could work for. And then we approached the owners with a rental offer, which they accepted, of £19,000 a week. And the tenants are still living there.
Wow, a lot of money. So yes. What does it mean to set up and run a lettings department?
So it's about having a good structure and working, obviously. The great thing about coming to Rockstone and setting up the rentals department was that there were a lot of amazing contacts that Becky already had that we could utilize the network really well in order to build our lettings book, and register of properties, and create a model that worked for us. So the time that I joined, the sales market hadn't been particularly strong. So we were able to offer the clients that we already had in place another avenue to help them through this time, which was from about 2017 until today. We're starting to see those properties now come back to the sales market again after having had tenants for several years. So it's about having the structure, and then having the understanding the processes that are in place, because obviously on the letting side of things, you don't have, like in sales, once the transaction happens, the lawyers take over, whereas in lettings we have to do all the legalities. So that's doing all the referencing, the checking of the tenants, the paperwork, the contracts. So we need to have contracts in place, having all our suppliers, so the inventory checks, the cleaning companies, the tradesmen who are able to go and check, the compliance checks. So we have to do electrical checks, gas checks. So it's having all these contractors and structures in place that once we did our first deal, we were ready to go and everybody was there lined up for us.
And you mentioned that you have the lettings department, but you also have property management. Could you explain the difference between the two and why it's important to have both?
So when we offer a service to our clients, we offer the tenant find service, which is we advertise the property, we find the tenant, we do the contracts, and at the point of the tenant moving in, we hand it back to the landlord and they look after the tenant throughout the tenancy. So any issues that the tenant has, they call the landlord directly and they're able to deal with it. Mm-hmm. The other service that we offer is the fully managed service, and that means we continue looking after the tenant and the property after they move in. So if there are any issues throughout the tenancy, we're the point of contact that they call, and we liaise between the tenant, the landlord, and the contractors to make sure that everything is dealt with and that the property and the tenants are all looked after and everything is all maintained.
And is there a particular skill set that you look for if you were to hire someone to be your assistant or to run property management for you?
I think the key thing with property management is actually having an understanding of a property, because a lot of times tenants call up with issues, which I appreciate are important, but they are something that can be resolved if you understand the workings of a boiler, if you understand the workings of certain light systems. So it doesn't necessarily need to be calling out a contractor all the time. There are certain things that can be resolved with a bit of common sense and understanding the house that you live in yourself, which I think it sounds quite basic, but it is something that a lot of people don't have an understanding of. And then from that point, it's understanding if there is an issue, who you call, what information do you need. If there's a problem with an appliance, you're going to need the serial numbers. You're going to need to know if there's warranties in place. So it's understanding all those key things that are essential when you're making sure that everything is then dealt with in the correct manner and the right contractor is dealt with for the right issue.
It's great. And if someone is thinking of joining an agency, if that's how they want to enter property, why, in your opinion, would lettings be a better option than sales? And Becky can jump in if she disagrees, but I'd like to.
Throughout my whole career, when I have told people that I work in the lettings department, especially when I was younger and I started, people always assumed that I was doing it as a platform to jump to sales. I think in the company I worked for previously at Hamptons, it was always seen as an inferior department. And I think that attitude has changed as the lettings market has changed. I think it really has gone from being something that was people for many years always aspired to buy, whereas now with the change in stamp duty, amongst other things, people are seeing renting as a longer term and just as credible way to live. I think that's evident by the change and the super prime lettings market that has developed over the past 5 years, especially. I think that was kicked into play, but with the increase in stamp duty in, was that 2014, really shifted things. And ever since, I think it's become more of a way of living for many people, especially the international market. If people are only going to be in London for 5 years, it can be much more cost effective for them to rent as opposed to purchase, to pay the stamp duty and then hope that the market has increased enough for them to sell and make a profit out of it. People are seeing it as a more viable financial option. And because of that, I think lettings is very, very fast paced. You have to be able to juggle a lot of plates at the same time, because while you're doing all your viewings, you're also dealing with all your paperwork for your other tenancies. You're managing the properties at the same time. So it does involve being able to prioritize your workload and be able to juggle plates very well. Be a bit of a jack of all trades, but if you like that fast-paced, hectic working environment, I think that it suits that kind of person who's able to run at 90 miles an hour.
Great. And you mentioned that you started in a local agency, and obviously now you're working in Prime Central doing deals for 19,000 a week. If someone is interested in lettings, do they need to start small, or is it realistic that they could jump into a boutique agency with those type of numbers at the beginning?
You need to start and build up your experience. I think it would be very difficult for me to say that they could jump in and start at the top. Because you want to build your confidence, you want to understand the market, and it's not just the prime central London market. You want to understand the whole of London. You want to understand the different areas. I think, even starting as a tenancy progressor, so dealing with the tenancy paperwork or in property management is a great route in as well, if you're not sure what you're wanting to do, to kind of understand the different elements of rentals. Because I think a lot of companies, especially in the bigger corporates, you're quite pigeonholed in what you do. Your job role can be quite specific. Whereas if you're wanting to be able to work in a small boutique, you have to understand all the elements of it. So working for bigger companies and smaller companies, to be able to then go on and say, I can do all elements of it, because that's what you need to be able to do when you're dealing with the super prime. And also, like Becky was saying, in terms of the qualifications, lettings side of things is regulated. So we are regulated by Arla Property Mark. So I had to do exams for this in order to be able to set up the lettings department and run that side of things. So we are an Arla regulated. Not all agencies are, but it is seen as the gold standard for the lettings department. And I also am currently studying for my next set of exams, which hopefully I'll be able to do in a year's time. I've got about 10 folders to get through of legal work.
Good luck with that, and thank you, Liv, for that explanation. I'm going to open the floor up to questions now. We have one in the Q&A, which is for Paul, but I think it may be applicable to everyone to answer as well. But it says, Paul, you mentioned VR being used for UK representatives in property. What do you think is the next big innovation coming in property? Paul, you start, and then the rest of the panelists, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. There is a platform which has recently launched. It's called IPSX, and this is on the commercial side, by the way. And they are essentially the first listed real estate platform, and it's backed by a company called M7, and they've just they're on the verge of listing a property. So similar to how a company will be listed on an exchange, they are the first exchange, and it's still really early days. It's they're in the infancy stage of things, but what that could mean is that in terms of how a property can raise money, that is now becoming an avenue, or so they expect it to become an avenue. So one of the problems with property has always been how you're able to capture some of your gains and raise finance, and the debt market has been either your best friend or your worst enemy. So that's a platform which is still really new and it's in its infancy, but if successful, that could definitely have an impact on the industry.
Thank you. And are there any other tech innovations? Gary, you mentioned one also, but any other that you think are the next steps for property?
I think, it's such a vast question. It's a great question, but it's so vast, it's so difficult to answer. And actually, Paul made me think, because I went to a conference and the one guy was talking about a Bitcoin exchange for property, where it's not Bitcoin, but it's the technology behind Bitcoin, where it's like Paul's talking about an exchange with property, but being traded on, I can't remember what is the technology behind Bitcoin.
Blockchain.
Blockchain.
Exactly. Thank you. But with blockchain technology running a platform for property, I'll be honest, it's beyond what I understand. We actually have within our Life residential business, we have a business called Life Ventures, where we started off doing tech, which is kind of different, and people automatically think, and I'm guessing the answer because you asked about VR, is what people think as technology changes. We backed a company called Good Lord, which Olivia may know. It's a landlord backs it, and we're very successful with it. So we continue to do it. What we see as the biggest innovation at the moment is construction tech, because every building has to be constructed and the savings are huge. So if you imagine, when we do a development, we get an agreement from the local authority which says, it's called a Section 106 agreement. So we're going to give you planning permission to build X number of flats, and then you have to give us in return 35% affordable housing. You have to build roads. You have to contribute money towards sewage systems, etc., etc. For the first time ever, I have in one of my Section 106s that we have to use what's called a BIM program, Building Information Management. And the reason that this is because the government knows if they can save 1% on construction, which is £1 trillion industry, it's a huge saving for the government. Bear in mind, the government is the biggest spender when they're building a road or an electricity plant, etc. So for us, that's where we see the biggest innovation in terms of the way the market works. And as Paul noted quite correctly, what Paul does is it's completely different to what I do, although it's the same generic thing. It's like cars and trucks. They're both vehicles, but it's a completely different industry. And in the residential market, I think there's in the UK, it's going to be a bigger move to a more movable society, more rental. Okay, so the Europe and America have someone mentioned before PRS. That means the private residential sector, and PRS is corporates are renting out buildings, and that should make living standards better because it becomes competitive. So it drives prices down actually. So I think those for me are the two biggest innovations, but there's so many. And in fact, talk about the VR, we had to do because, and someone asked the question earlier, which I actually answered, I typed the answer about how COVID affected us. Well, interestingly enough, our cladding comes from Wuhan. So in November 2 years ago, I thought, can you believe it? There's like some bug in China and it's affecting our deliveries. I should have only known what was about to happen. But we were quite lucky because construction continued. However, our whole marketing suite, we had to make completely virtual. So people could look at our marketing suite virtually. So there's always innovations coming like that. And there's various disruptors. I can't really talk for the commercial market, but you saw it with Zoopla and people like that. Purple Bricks are disrupting the market. But ultimately, you have to build a building, you have to rent it out or invest or whatever, or sell it or whatever the case is. So it's quite basic as to what innovation can happen.
It's really fascinating because people think of property, it's always quite traditional. You can never change the fact that it is bricks and you need to sell it. But the fact that tech can still get involved and innovate is exciting, and it's interesting to see how it all develops. We've got a question in here that says, would you say property is an industry where you're treated respectfully? Do I need to have thick skin? For anyone can answer that one.
Very thick skin.
Very, I agree.
But I think that goes for every industry. You know, there'll always be idiots that put you down and there'll be nice people that bring you up. You know what? You've got to have faith in yourself. You can't fall at a hurdle. You have to keep going. That's life. I mean, that's maybe just an age thing. I'm guessing I'm the oldest one here, but it's an age thing.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to keep
I agree. Just it's about backing yourself, and I think it's that comes irrespective of what industry you're working in. To be honest, as you advance in your career, you may get pushback, definitely, and it's how you feel you can navigate some of those obstacles. So I don't think it's property specific. I think that can happen across various different industries.
Great.
I think a lot of the people we deal with, the transactions we're dealing with, it can be highly emotive for a lot of people. And I think the key for us as agents is to not take things personally, because a lot of the time it can come across that way. It's very difficult to do. It takes many years of biting your tongue and restraining, but it is understanding the situation that people are in when they're buying, selling, renting. It can be people are moving for lots of different reasons. They can be personal, things can be going on in people's lives. So when you're dealing with that sort of mindset, you know, obviously certain things can come up. And for us, it's about managing it, navigating it, and making it as smooth and peaceful for everyone as possible, and for ourselves included.
Right. And I know for so many of the mentees that I speak to at Shadow to Shine, a big reason why they say property for an industry they want to go into is because of money. Is there still money for people to make in property, and how long do they have to go before they're making the big money that they look at, where they see the glamorous cars and houses and lifestyle?
I'd like to say something, because someone's also asked a question, and I won't mention names, so I'm not quite sure who sees what, but someone said that they've got £100,000 to invest in. What should they do? Long experience, and I think everybody will agree with me on the panel. You must remember, property is a long-term asset, okay? So if you think you're going to buy a property and sell it tomorrow for a big profit, you will end up maybe being lucky, but you'll probably end up losing money. If you invest in a longer term fashion, okay, where you work out where you work out what your rents are, you work out what your interest rates are, and you make it work, and it's sustainable, you should never lose money. Hence what the guy said to me, even stupid people can make money, just don't sell it. Okay, if the market happens to go up, okay, and you get a super profit and you sell, that's great. Okay, but then you're a trader, you're not. But you must remember, for every market that goes up, it can go down. So now asking, can people make big money? The truth is, if we get a market that crashes, new people can make good money in the market. Okay, because new people can be a little bit less cautious and a bit risk averse, or not risk averse. In my position, I'm very risk averse because I don't want to lose what I've made. Okay, so if the market drops, I'll kind of cover myself in a shell rather than saying, right, let's go out and get it. So I know it sounds terrible, but a bad market is what creates opportunity rather than a good market. A good market's always going up.
Yeah.
Very important that whoever asked me that question or asked the question about where to invest, my theory is always invest for the long term. And if you may make money in the short term, that's luck.
Great, thank you. And Marley has asked, I'll put this one to Becky. If he was starting a business now, what would you do differently from how you started before?
Wow. What would I do differently? I'd definitely project. And I think, Gary and everyone on this call, will be a testament to that. You need to project and understanding your P&L, so your profit and loss. No one ever sat down with me and explained, once you get a check, tax, you need 20% needs to go to tax to a separate account, 20% needs to go to VAT on a separate account. And you really need enough in your account to run your business. And I mean, and that's knowing every single cost for a year, because pre-pandemic, there's many things that can happen. Brexit, economics, there's, your own personal health, your own personal mindset. So I think projection is the best advice that I can give. And research, really research. One thing I've got to say is coming into the property industry, because the webinar is about this, and it always verges on the edge of entrepreneurship as well. But anything you're going into, really do your research, and if the opportunity comes up, don't just jump at the opportunity. Think about the consideration of, is this the right fit for me? And that's what I would say is this the right business for me? And, are the blood, sweat and tears going to be worth it? And also the right job, is it diverse enough for me? Is the culture the same? I keep on saying that. And that's so important, be in a position, and we're all a testament to this, where you can work with the clients that you want to work with, not that you have to work with. And then you'll last a lot longer.
So what are your typical demographic of clients at the moment?
We've sold to a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, just very recently. It was bought for them, but they're, 17 million pounds. And the oldest I've had was 92, and she was a photographer called Eve Arnold, and she lived on Mount Street, and it was a walk up. But as in diversity and culture, I would say, a lot of English and Americans coming back into the market. The domestic market's picked up again. Less Russians because of all the sanctions, and the KYC and the AML requirements now. So the international buyer has changed. But I would say it's a really London is, that's the beauty of London. And talking about all of us working in London, we are this melting pot of clients and this incredible history of architecture, and limits on what we're able to do, what Gary can build, and what Paul reflects on, and where things can be taken to in height. So I think London is probably the demographic for all of us, is probably one of the most diverse.
And for everyone on the panel, what made you choose London? Would you ever move outside of London to other countries or other cities in the UK?
From my point of view, no, because if I've conquered London, I've done okay. And a lot of people tend to go to different cities because the capital values look cheaper. So I remember like 15, 18 years ago, when I remember saying to someone, when a one-bedroom flat exceeds £200,000, we've got to get it up the market. Okay, well, at £400,000, we thought, okay, well, Manchester was 120, and I bought one flat in Manchester. We sold it about 15 years later for about the same price. So London is still the global city of the world, in my opinion. It's a fantastic city. It's great.
And as I say continually, these conservation area restrictions, keep the city what it is, you know, and keep the supply limited, whether it's commercial or residential. In any market, the price per square foot for a commercial prime unit or a prime resi unit, if it's scarce and trophy, someone will always pay the premium. And that's the thing about investment in property. Don't buy and invest on the cheapest bit of land when it doesn't have the tick boxes. You know, for Gary and the scheme that he's doing, which is going to change the face of Park Royal. I mean, I've gone to Park Royal for, you know, my industrial sites, by my kitchens down there, but, you know, to make that a village now, you know, post-pandemic is very clever, because, you know, people aren't location-led anymore. It's a lifestyle, and he's picked up on the energy of West London and what it was originally. So I think you have to be receptive to the history of an area if you're looking to invest, and where it's going, you know, close to the train links, you know, where it's near to, is it near shops? You know, it's the same with Paul's profession as well. So I think the key to, if you're wanting to get into property, be very mindful of lifestyle and politics as well. Keep up to date on what is going on in the world in general, you know, who's dating who, you know, who's wearing what, which is the latest car, you know, what's happening, what are people eating. I valued something in Finsbury Park the other day, and the property prices have gone up because there's a Joe's round the corner, which is apparently like 20 quid for a sourdough next to the police station where I used to see people get shot, you know, and it's added probably $500,000 to the value of my client's house because it's the coolest coffee spot in ever. And that's just because I turned the corner and I was like, oh my God. So I think look out for hotspots, and how you'll always look at the commercial element, and you'll then be led to see what the residential is.
And Karina, can I just say something? I'm older than I look, thank goodness. But my experience is, do something that you enjoy. Don't do it for the big cars and the fancy things. Do it because you enjoy it. And if you enjoy it, you will be successful. And if you're successful, all those things will follow. Yeah. Use that as motivation. Do something that makes you happy. I always say to my children, I said, my success is the ability to give them the ability to do what they want to do.
Yeah, great.
It doesn't mean they can't have things. Okay, so my one kid, one of Paul's competitors, works now for Jones Lang, is in capital markets, which, by the way, is a completely different side to the business. That's raising money for developers and investors, etc. My other kid is doing psychiatry, and he wants to be a psychologist. And I say to him, as long as you do the best you can as a psychologist, and I'll tell you what, he'll probably be much happier and more satisfied than my older son.
Can I just ask Gary a question, Karina? Can I just ask?
Yeah, please.
Do you know how to speak Mandarin?
Do I know? No.
So you were going to China, no, so no Mandarin, no Cantonese. You were going to China and you didn't know how to speak the language.
Well, I did. I said, do you speak English?
And that was the language. Sorry, I just had to ask that.
Have you ever tried a few words? I probably shouldn't say them on this form, but you know.
But that's just
English is still the universal language, thank goodness.
Someone's messaged me privately a question for Paul, saying, is it harder to negotiate when people aren't personally invested because it's not residential?
It's a good question.
Is it hard to negotiate? I'd say it's easier because they're not as emotional, so they're able to detach. You know, when they see a property, they're thinking about, the major tick boxes, can it fulfill some of our strategies? Mm-hmm. And so I think they're very much upfront with me and saying, look, this is where we need to get to in order to fulfill some of our objectives. So again, I can't comment on resi, but from the outside looking in, I would say because there's less emotion to it, it never really is a drawn out process. It's this is what we need, this is how much we're looking to spend, make it happen.
Would you agree with that, Olivia?
I always thought, sorry to stop out, but I always thought that commercial was so much harder to close because there's a lack of emotion. I think closing is always
let me caveat it then. I think, I'll caveat it. There's a variety of buyers, right? And you can have your funds on one side of the spectrum and your private investors. And I would say my private investors, which are majority of my clients, they're more similar to the clients that the rest of the people on the panel will have. And so the reason why I made that point was because I've seen my colleagues who deal largely with funds transact fairly quickly, because it's they have a clear structure in place, they have a clear process, they can close deals like that. And I've seen perhaps on the private side where it's a bit more emotional, where that process does drag on a little bit. So that's why I was making the differentiation.
I think it probably involves a different set of skills as the negotiator, because sounds like from Paul's side, you're dealing with something that's quite analytical. It's an A to B. If the numbers match and the product meets what they're needing, you get the result. Whereas on the residential side, it is more emotional. So you're dealing with people who are, it can be a feeling of a property that they don't like that turns them away from it. And for us, it's about navigating, finding what the pinpoint is of the person that we're selling to, and being able to not manipulate, but use that to be able to help us to guide them in the right direction. So it's a different skill set, I guess, from A to B. We're dealing with navigating people's emotional angles in terms of pushing them towards the right property, as opposed to it being an analytical investment as such. But I guess that depends on if they're buying as an investment, or it's a property for them to live in.
That's great. So I'm going to end the Q&A now, unless anyone does have a question that they want to ask before the end of the webinar. But for all of our panelists, are you happy for people to contact you via email or LinkedIn if they have more questions? Can we share your details at Shadow to Shine for the young people watching?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, pleasure. And in fact, if you just, quite interestingly, if you go to our Life Residential website, you'll see all the different departments, like Olivia was talking about, the admin side, the rental side, the sales side. There's a whole host. And if you have a look on our website, it shows you our team, and it gives you quite a good cross-section of the jobs. And if anybody out there is interested and they phone up Life Residential, I believe they are hiring at the moment and interviewing, etc. And if you mention my name, you might jump a bit of the queue.
Brilliant. Thank you. So thank you again to our panelists. Thank you, Rockstone, City and Docklands and Knight Frank for participating. And I hope you all have a great evening, and I hope everyone watching has enjoyed the webinar and found it useful.
Yeah, good luck everyone on your journey.
And well done to what you're doing, Karina. It's a very admirable.
Yeah, well done, Karina.
Yeah,
That
well
was
done.
very well put
Thank you.
together. Really enjoyed doing that.
And thank you to Joe as well, who's been doing all the background work for us.
Yeah.
All right.
Very well structured. Thank you.
Great. Bye, everyone. And just email any questions for all the viewers.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.